My name is Kira Holt. I'm 29 years old, and my job is teaching people how not to die when their phone battery hits 1% and Google Maps gives up. On paper, my title is Wilderness Survival and Environmental Education Instructor for a state conservation program in the Colorado mountains. In reality, I'm the woman standing between city people and their worst decisions in the woods. It's not a corner office or Silicon Valley money, but it's honest, it's real. On my base salary, I clear about $48,000 a year. The real boost comes from private survival courses I run on weekends, 2-day intensives where executives, influencers, and burnt-out office workers pay $800 a head to learn how to start a fire without a lighter and filter water without poisoning themselves. I usually run 6 to 8 people per session. During peak season, I run 2, sometimes 3 sessions a month. Do the math and it adds $9,600 to $14,400 a year. So yeah, I'm hovering a bit over $72,000 annually. Not rich, not poor. But for someone who spends most days outside, living on land she owns, it's more than enough. 5 years ago, when the market dipped, I bought a small cabin for $180,000. 1 bedroom. Nothing glamorous. But it came with 20 acres of forest, a creek cutting across the back of the property, and enough wildlife traffic that I can teach field identification without ever leaving home. The previous owner was a retired forest ranger who'd maintained trails and built observation platforms throughout the land. Perfect for my line of work. The cabin was a wreck when I bought it. The roof leaked in 3 places. The plumbing was optimistic. The electrical system wheezed every time I plugged in a toaster. I spent 2 years fixing it up myself. YouTube tutorials, trial and error, the occasional panicked call to my dad when something hissed, sparked, or gushed water where water definitely should not be. Now it's solid, efficient, and completely mine. No mortgage, just property taxes and utilities, which run me about $400 a month total. Financial freedom doesn't always look like luxury condos and imported marble countertops. Sometimes it looks like a patch metal roof, stacked firewood, and a truck that always starts, even in a snowstorm. For 3 years, I shared that life with a man named Mason Blake, 27. Mason branded himself online as the mountain minimalism guy. On social media, he was the rugged, soulful outdoorsman who drank black coffee on cabin decks and talked about simplicity and authenticity. His feed was all misty sunrises over pine trees, close-ups of calloused hands on axe handles, and captions about leaving the rat race and living aligned with nature. He had about 85,000 followers who treated his posts like scripture. Reality? He preferred upscale Denver restaurants to any hiking trail longer than a quarter mile. The cabin content was staged, usually within 50 feet of my front door after I'd done the actual hiking to scout locations. He'd bring 3 outfits for variation, spend an hour getting the lighting just right, and then whine about bugs until we went back inside. His actual lifestyle was anything but minimal. Designer everything. $300 joggers he never jogged in. Vintage flannel shirts that came from boutiques, not thrift stores. A leased white SUV because, in his words, it looks cleaner in shots than your beat-up truck, babe. He made decent money from brand deals and sponsored posts, maybe $4,000 to $5,000 a month when things were going well. But he spent like he was clearing 6 figures. Credit cards always flirting with their limits. Subscriptions, gadgets, new gear, for content. And somewhere under all of that, there was this unspoken assumption. Since I owned property and had a stable job, I should quietly carry more of the boring real-world stuff. Groceries, gas, repairs. I met Mason at an outdoor gear expo in Denver. I was there doing a survival demonstration. How to splint a broken ankle with what you have in your backpack. How to signal for rescue without a phone. Mason approached me afterward, eyes bright, asking smart questions about wilderness safety. He talked about how much he respected genuine outdoor educators and how tired he was of fake influencers. It was a good performance, I believed him. Our first few dates were great. He laughed at my stories about teaching kids to identify animal tracks in fresh snow. He asked about the cabin like he actually cared what it meant to me, not what it would look like on camera. He seemed fascinated by the idea of people reconnecting with nature. Looking back, he was probably just gathering raw material for his brand. At the time, I thought I'd found someone who understood why my work mattered. About 6 months in, the cracks started to show. He complained about my schedule. Weekends were prime time for my private courses, which meant I couldn't always drop everything for brunch in the city with his influencer friends. He started making comments about my truck being off-brand next to his pristine SUV. Jokes about how if I really wanted to grow my business, I'd let him repackage my survival courses for his audience. He asked why I didn't install a hot tub for content, because apparently, in his mind, every mountain property needed a steaming pool with fairy lights to be worth posting. But then there were those other moments, the ones that kept me hooked. He'd show up with groceries and actually cook. He'd help me edit photos for my website, not just his posts. He'd curl up with me on the couch, head on my shoulder, and talk about maybe co-creating a series that blended my knowledge with his platform. I clung to those moments, told myself that if I was patient, if I proved I was all in, he'd grow out of the performative phase and settle into something real. By year 2, I was overlooking a lot. The maxed out credit cards, the way he'd vanish on weekend collabs with other creators and go dark for 48 hours, the way he'd invite me to expensive restaurants, post photos acting like he was treating me, and then let the bill sit in the middle of the table until I grabbed it. I told myself we were building toward a future, that this was an investment in us. By the time our 3rd anniversary started creeping up on the calendar, I was exhausted and still determined to prove something, mostly to myself, that I hadn't wasted 3 years, that this wasn't one long, elaborate mistake. Mason had been dropping hints for months about wanting something memorable for our anniversary. Translation: something luxurious enough that he could flex on his followers and his friends whose partners were tech bros and finance guys. So I planned. I booked a romantic rental cabin, not mine, but another one deeper in the mountains, 2 hours further out. Real wilderness. No cell signal. The kind of place he pretended to live in online. Then, for Saturday night, I managed to snag a reservation at Meridian, one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants. The kind of place without prices on the menu. The kind of place you have to call exactly at 10 a.m., 2 months in advance, and pray. I even told him he could invite 2 of his closest friends, Brianna and Ashley, both influencers in his circle, thinking I was being supportive, helping him maintain relationships that mattered to his work. The reservation for 4 was going to cost me close to $600 once everything was said and done. It wasn't just an anniversary dinner, it was a statement. See? I can give you the life you keep hinting you want, and I don't have to sell my soul or abandon the forest to do it. Friday at the rental cabin was tolerable. The view was breathtaking, the air clean and sharp, the silence deep. Mason spent most of the afternoon setting up shots, outfit changes, angling his enamel mug just so, filming slow-mo clips of himself splitting wood he'd stacked for one video and then never actually used. I told myself this was his job, his version of paperwork. Saturday night is when everything snapped. We arrived at Meridian on time after 40 minutes of circling for parking because valet wasn't worth it, but also looked tacky in photos. Brianna and Ashley were already seated when we walked in. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, expensive outfits that whispered when they moved. The menu had no prices, never a good sign. The server launched into a poetic description of the specials, each dish sounding more like a mortgage payment than a meal. I tried not to flinch. "So, Kira," Brianna started, smiling with the kind of sharpness that never reached her eyes, "you're still doing that survival teacher thing, right?" I took the bait. I talked about teaching kids to build emergency shelters, about adults relearning how to respect weather and terrain, about conservation practices that could actually save lives in a blizzard or wildfire. Halfway through a sentence about orienteering, I saw Mason's face, cold, embarrassed, like I was talking about dumpster diving instead of ecological literacy. "Are you seriously talking about that here?" He cut in with a dry laugh. "You sound like you're living in the past, babe." The table went quiet. Even the server subtly stepped back. "Mason," I said slowly, "I'm talking about work that—" "Look at Brianna's boyfriend," he went on, eyes on his friends, not me. Series B funding on his 3rd startup. Ashley's guy just bought a condo in Aspen, and you're out in the woods teaching people to make campfires for, 35 grand a year? The number was wrong. He knew it was wrong, but the truth didn't matter. The performance did. Heat crawled up my neck, but my voice stayed even. "You know that's not what I make," I said. He leaned back, smile turning mean. "Meaning doesn't pay the bills, Kira. I've been patient. I thought you'd want something bigger eventually, but you're still playing in the dirt while everyone else is building actual wealth. I looked at him, really looked, at the man who used my home as a backdrop, my work as an aesthetic, my stability as a safety net. And then he delivered the line that changed everything. That's why I think we should just be friends with benefits from now on, he said lightly. You can be comfort, companionship. I'll be free to find someone more ambitious to build a future with, someone who fits my brand. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Brianna looked uncomfortable. Ashley suddenly found the breadbasket fascinating. I picked up my bag, slid $200 in cash onto the table. My hand didn't shake. When you get back to the cabin, I said quietly, your things will be packed. You can come get them whenever you're ready. Don't be so dramatic, Kira, Mason called after me as I stood. His voice carried across the restaurant like a bad song. This is why you'll always be stuck where you are. You can't handle adult conversations about realistic expectations. I didn't turn around. I walked out of that restaurant, out of that carefully curated scene, and felt something deep inside me switch off. Not my feelings, my tolerance. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment his story ended and mine finally began. The drive back to my cabin that night was 2 straight hours of highway and silence. No radio, no podcast, just the low hum of the engine and my hands steady on the wheel. My chest felt hollow and strangely light, like someone had finally cut away a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten what it felt like not to drag it around. Humiliation burned, sure. My cheeks still heated when I replayed his words. Friends with benefits, someone more ambitious, stuck where you are. But under that, deeper, there was something else. Relief. He hadn't just shown me who he was. He'd shown me who he would always be. By the time I turned off the main road and onto the narrow gravel track that led to my land, the stars had come out in full, clear, cold points scattered across a sky that didn't care who had more followers. The cabin porch light was dark. I'd left it off, not expecting to come home this early. The forest wrapped around the house like a shield. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and exhaled. Really exhaled, like I hadn't taken a full breath in months. My phone buzzed before I'd even taken my boots off. Mason, you're overreacting. Mason, come back inside so we can talk like adults. Another buzz. Mason, you walked out in front of my friends, Kira. Do you have any idea how that made me look? I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard for a moment. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and walked away. I made tea, changed into an old hoodie and leggings, built a fire in the wood stove with the practiced efficiency that came from years of living alone in the mountains. The phone kept chiming from the kitchen. By the time the kettle whistled, there were 16 unread messages. I took my mug, walked over, and finally looked. Mason, you're being incredibly immature. Mason, I was just being honest about our future. Mason, you should be grateful I'm still willing to keep you in my life at all. Mason, a lot of guys in my position would just walk. I scrolled. Mason, don't throw away 3 years over one conversation. Mason, you're acting like a victim. Mason, if you can't handle the truth, that's your problem. I read every line once, calmly, like assessing weather conditions before a hike. Then I opened my contact list, clicked his name, and hit block. Message thread vanished into a single system notification. Blocked. Instagram. Block. TikTok. Block. Facebook. Block. The shared Google Calendar I'd let him into so he could help me optimize my schedule, removed access. No dramatic goodbye paragraph. No, we need to talk when you've calmed down. No final speech. Just silence. He'd wanted to downgrade me, so I did some downgrading of my own. To nothing. Sunday morning, I woke before sunrise out of habit. The air inside the cabin was cool, faintly smoky from last night's fire. I pulled on boots, shrugged into a flannel, and stepped outside. The forest was still black and silver, outlines of trees just starting to emerge. Somewhere down near the creek, a bird called once, sharp and solitary. Frost glittered on the grass. I followed my usual loop, check the water filters at the creek, inspect the solar panels, walk the perimeter trails the old ranger had cut years ago. The familiar routine grounded me, smoothed the jagged edges. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sky was pale blue, and my mind was clear enough to do what needed to be done next. Pack. Over the last 3 years, Mason had slowly migrated roughly 40% of his life into my space. Clothes, skincare, camera gear, lights, tripods, props. The cabin felt smaller with his stuff everywhere, louder somehow. I dragged 3 flattened cardboard boxes out of the storage shed and started. Designer shirts folded into neat stacks, shoes still in pristine condition because most of them had never seen actual dirt, skincare products that needed refrigeration, enough rustic mugs to stock a cafe. Each item went into a box with the same steady rhythm. Into the box. The expensive coffee grinder he'd insisted on but never learned to use. Into the box. The ring light he'd set up in my living room and never taken down. Into the box. A stack of notebooks full of half-formed caption ideas, brand lists, and engagement strategies. With each thing I removed, my home expanded. Air returned to corners that had been suffocating under someone else's performance. By late morning, 3 large boxes were packed and taped shut. His clothes, gear, random possessions he'd scattered across my shelves and dresser. Contained. The only trace of him left in the main room was a forgotten hoodie slung over the back of the couch. I picked it up, held it for the barest second, then shoved it on top of the last box and sealed the tape. I'd just set the marker down after labeling the box when I heard tires crunching on gravel outside. My body tensed automatically. For a second, I saw it in my mind. White SUV, music blaring, Mason storming up the path with some rehearsed speech about misunderstanding and second chances. But when I stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside, it wasn't a white SUV. It was a silver Subaru, slightly dented, mud-splashed, functional. The driver's door opened and a man climbed out. Tall, dark hair pulled back in a low tie, scrubs top under a fleece jacket. He moved with the easy efficiency of someone used to dealing with emergencies at 3 a.m. without dramatics. Noah Blake, Mason's older brother. We'd met a handful of times at family gatherings over the years. I knew he worked as a wildlife vet at a rehabilitation hospital. Knew he was quiet, observant, the kind of man people trusted without fanfare. I opened the cabin door before he could knock. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, hands slightly raised, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Kira," he said gently. "Hey." His eyes held so much secondhand embarrassment, I almost felt bad for him. "Let me guess," I replied. "Mason sent you to get his stuff." He blew out a quiet breath, shoulders dropping. "Yeah. He said you two had a fight." Then he met my gaze more directly. "But Brianna called my mom last night. She told us what actually happened." His jaw tightened. "I am really sorry." The apology was simple. No excuses. No, I'm sure he didn't mean it. Just clean acknowledgement that it had been cruel. I stepped aside and gestured toward the boxes stacked near the door. "That's all of it," I said. "Or close enough. If he realizes he left something else, he can text from another number. I'll have it waiting outside. I won't be here." Noah nodded slowly, eyes flicking around the cabin as he stepped inside. He took it in properly. The bookshelves lined with field guides, the topographic maps on the walls, the photographs of hawks, foxes, and mountain lions I'd captured over the years. "This place," he said quietly. "Whitney. Sorry. Mason." He corrected himself with a grimace. "Mason posted pictures all the time, but this doesn't look anything like those." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "He only ever photographed the corners that fit his aesthetic," I said. "The rest didn't make good content." Noah bent to lift the first box. He tested the weight, adjusted his grip. "Can I help with the others?" he asked. "You're already helping," I said. "He didn't show up himself." Something flickered across Noah's face, something like shame, something like weary recognition. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," he murmured. We carried the first 2 boxes out in silence. The air was bright and cold, the driveway a ribbon of pale dust between trees. A jay screeched somewhere overhead. On the walk back for the 3rd box, Noah slowed, looking again at the walls, the wood stove, the stack of carved wooden utensils drying on the counter. "I've always been curious about this place," he admitted. Mason's photos were filtered, staged, but the way he talked, I could tell there was more here than he ever showed. "There is," I said, but he was never interested in the parts that didn't fit into a square frame. "No," Noah agreed softly. He wouldn't be. He picked up the last box, then hesitated. "Is it okay if I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." When he said those things, about your work, your income, did you actually believe any of it, even for a second? I met his eyes. "I believed him the first 100 times he joked about it," I said. "I believed I had to prove myself, that if I just earned a little more, acted a little shinier, he'd stop being embarrassed by me." I shook my head. "Last night, I finally realized I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. Something in Noah's expression shifted. Respect, maybe. Relief. For what it's worth, he said, my colleagues would kill for your setup. Land, water access, no mortgage, work that actually matters. That sounds less like stuck and more like free to me. The words hit a soft place inside my chest. I swallowed. Thanks, I said. That's how it feels from where I'm standing. We loaded the last box into the trunk of the Subaru. He arranged them carefully, making sure nothing shifted, nothing delicate broke. The exact opposite of Mason tossing equipment into his SUV while complaining about scuffing his boots. So, Noah said, shutting the trunk, this might be the wrong time to ask, but... He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking oddly shy for a man who probably wrestled sedated elk on a weekly basis. If you ever want to grab coffee, he continued, not to talk about my brother, God knows he doesn't deserve that much airtime, but to talk about this. He gestured toward the trees, the cabin, the maps visible through the window. Conservation. Wildlife. Real stuff. I'd like that. There was nothing slick in his voice. No angle. No sense that I was a prop in someone else's story. Just a man who loved the same mountains I did, standing there under a cold blue sky, offering conversation. For the first time since I walked out of Meridian, I felt my mouth curve into something that wasn't bitter. I'd like that too, I said. He smiled then. A small, real thing. It made the whole cabin feel warmer. As he climbed into the Subaru and backed down the drive, I realized something important. Mason had tried to downgrade me, but somehow in the fallout, the universe had quietly upgraded my entire life. I just didn't know yet how far that upgrade would go. The next morning, the world felt different. Not in the dramatic movie montage way, no birds forming a heart shape in the sky. No sudden epiphany that made everything fall into place. Just lighter, quieter. Like someone had finally turned off a background noise I didn't know I'd been hearing for years. I spent the early hours doing what I always did after emotional earthquakes. Work. Routine is a life raft. I checked the trail cameras, downloaded the footage onto my laptop, made notes about the fox family that had been denning closer to the creek this season. I repaired a section of fencing a storm had knocked loose. I cleaned out the fire pit. By the time I finished, the sun was overhead and my mind had settled into something steady. At 11:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unknown. Hey, it's Noah. If this is the wrong number, please ignore me forever. A pause. Unknown. But if this is Kira, want to grab that coffee today? I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. I'd expected a few days of silence, space, maybe even second thoughts from him. Not because he seemed uncertain, but because he wasn't the type to rush someone fresh out of a breakup, even a toxic one. But the message did not feel rushed. It felt careful, considerate, like he was giving me the option without pushing anything. I typed back, Kira, it's the right number. Kira. And yes, coffee sounds good. He sent back a single thumbs up emoji and somehow it made me laugh. The diner was halfway between his hospital and my cabin, a tiny place with vinyl booths, chipped coffee mugs, and a waitress named Linda who'd worked there 30 years and had no tolerance for nonsense. I arrived first. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside. Warm air hit my face, smelling of bacon grease, black coffee, and something cinnamon adjacent that was probably a pie cooling on the counter. Linda glanced up. Well, look who's back from the wilderness, she said. Sit wherever you want, sweetheart. Coffee? Always, I said. She poured without asking, because Linda didn't believe in the concept of no. A few minutes later, the bell jingled again, and Noah walked in. He was still wearing scrubs, fleece jacket unzipped, hair slightly wind-tossed. He looked like someone who'd driven straight from patching up a hawk or a raccoon or some other creature with more spirit than sense. When he saw me, his face lit. Not dramatically, not in a performative way, just a small, real shift, like sunlight hitting granite. He slid into the booth across from me. Hey, he said. Hey. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Not in a romantic, cinematic, electricity crackling between us way. More like two people who were relieved to be in a room with someone who actually got it. Linda appeared at the table like a materializing hawk. You want the usual? She asked Noah. Yes, he said, and whatever she gets. I haven't ordered yet, I protested. Linda gave me a look that translated to, I know what you want better than you do. Trust her, Noah said. She's undefeated. I smiled despite myself. Coffee arrived, then plates stacked with breakfast foods that could revive the dead: eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, and something that Linda insisted was a pancake but looked more like a fluffy, buttery cloud given physical form. We spent the first few minutes talking about safe things: work, weather, the recent uptick in injured animals being brought into the hospital. Then, slowly, the conversation shifted. "You know," Noah said, stabbing a piece of bacon with unnecessary force, "I didn't know what to expect yesterday. I wasn't sure if you'd even want to talk to anyone in my family after everything Mason pulled." "I almost didn't," I admitted, "but you didn't do anything wrong." "Still," he said, "I felt weird about showing up, like I was intruding." "You weren't." His expression softened. "What he said to you," Noah shook his head, jaw tightening, "it was cruel, not just blunt or thoughtless. Cruel." I shrugged, picking at my toast. "He's been drifting that direction for a long time. I just didn't want to see it." "Why not?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because if I admitted he wasn't who I thought he was, I'd have to admit I spent 3 years investing in someone who never planned to meet me halfway." Noah looked at me for a long moment. "That's not how it works," he said quietly. "People don't get to waste you. They just reveal whether they deserve you." Something in my chest tightened. Not painfully, just unexpectedly. I took a sip of coffee to break the moment. "What about you?" I asked. "You said yesterday that you weren't surprised by what Mason did." Noah let out a breath that seemed to carry years of frustration. "Mason has always been," he searched for a word, "performative. Everything he does is about how it looks, not what it actually is. He grew up chasing approval like it was oxygen." "From your parents?" "Not exactly. Our parents are good people, grounded, but Mason always wanted applause, validation, attention." He paused. "And he got addicted to the kind of attention that doesn't last." I nodded. I knew that type well. "You two seem really different," I said. "We are," he replied simply. He went one way, I went the other. "A beat." "And you?" he asked. "Do you always just carry on after storms? Repair a fence, check a camera, brew coffee, keep moving?" I laughed softly. "Pretty much." "That's a strength," he said. "It's survival," I corrected, which I guess fits the job. We both smiled. The conversation drifted easily after that. Wildlife rehab stories, student mishaps in my survival classes, the time Noah stitched up a fox who bit him mid-procedure, and he just kept working like someone from a myth. 2 hours passed without either of us noticing. When we finally stepped outside, the sun was high, the parking lot shimmering with heat. "Well," he said softly, hands in his jacket pockets, "I'm really glad you came." "So am I." He hesitated, then added, "If you ever want to talk about anything, work, animals, bad restaurant experiences, I'm around." My lips curved. "You know," I said, "I think that might be dangerous." His brow furrowed. "Dangerous?" "Yeah," I said, stepping back toward my truck, "because I could get used to this." The look on Noah's face, that split-second flicker of surprised warmth, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a rebound. This wasn't a distraction. This was the beginning of something I hadn't dared hope for. A connection built on truth, not aesthetics. A man who didn't need me to perform, who didn't need me to shrink, who saw me, not the content I could provide. A man who looked at the same mountains I did and saw possibility, not an aesthetic backdrop. Driving home, I realized something simple and stunning. I was healing. Not because time was passing, but because someone finally treated me like I mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. No matter how much you prepare yourself, nothing truly trains you for the moment you walk straight into the battlefield known as a family barbecue where your ex and his entire extended family will be present. But that's exactly where I found myself 2 weeks later. It started innocently enough. Noah and I had been grabbing coffee regularly, talking about wildlife rehab, joking about Mason's complete inability to tell a pine from a fir tree, sharing stories of our workdays, his filled with injured animals, and frantic calls from park rangers, mine filled with students who thought moss always grew on the north side of trees. It doesn't. Slowly, carefully, our conversations drifted into something warmer. Not romantic, not yet, but real. Then one afternoon, over pancakes in the diner, Noah said it casually, as if it wouldn't be a nuclear event. "So, my parents are hosting our annual summer barbecue next Saturday." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Mason will be there." "Yeah," he said, "pretty much everyone will." A beat. "I would like you to come with me," he added gently. "But if that feels like too much, I completely understand." He meant it. He wasn't testing me or baiting me or hoping for drama. But the truth hit me with a clarity I didn't expect. I wasn't afraid of Mason anymore. And I wasn't going to let him dictate where I could or couldn't show up. I'll go, I said. I'm done making myself small to avoid his reactions. Noah's smile, small, relieved, warm, settled something in me. And that's how, 1 week later, I found myself stepping out of Noah's Subaru in front of a suburban house with a manicured yard, a packed driveway, and the faint smell of grilled meat drifting over the fence. Children's laughter spilled into the street. Someone yelled for more ice. A dog barked twice, sounding like it wanted a burger. It was normal, comfortable, nothing like the curated, filtered world Mason presented online. Noah walked beside me toward the house, brushing his hand lightly against mine. Not grabbing it, not assuming, just a quiet reassurance. Inside, the Blake home felt lived in. Real photos lined the hallway. Graduation shots, childhood birthdays, family vacations at lakes and national parks. Mason appeared in many of them, younger, brighter, before the sheen of social media polished him into something manufactured. We didn't get far before a woman in her 60s rounded the corner carrying a bowl of salad and paused mid-step. "Oh, you must be Kira." Patricia Blake, Noah and Mason's mother, set the bowl down on a console table and pulled me into a hug so sincere it startled me. "Noah has told us so much about you," she said warmly, "and I just want to say I'm very sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve that." Her blunt honesty hit me harder than any apology Mason had ever faked. "Thank you," I managed. "Come," she said, waving us toward the backyard. "Everyone's outside. Richard is at the grill, pretending he knows what he's doing." As we stepped into the yard, the noise washed over me. Cousins chasing each other, aunts gossiping, uncles arguing over the best way to char corn, tables crowded with potluck dishes. And right at the far corner near the outdoor bar, Mason. He was in a designer button-up, sunglasses perched on his head, drink in hand, posture carefully casual. He was mid-selfie when he saw us. The moment his gaze landed on me beside Noah, the phone slipped in his hand, and he barely caught it before it shattered. His expression flickered through emotions like an overloaded circuit. Shock, rage, confusion, panic. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. He marched toward us, voice already rising. "What is she doing here?" Half the yard turned. Conversations froze. Even the dog stopped barking. Noah stepped forward, calm as a surgeon. "Kira is my guest," he said simply. Mason's face turned the color of overcooked lobster. "You're dating my ex-girlfriend?" There it was. The accusation he thought would level the field. Noah didn't blink. "You publicly humiliated her at a restaurant," he said matter-of-factly. "You told her she wasn't good enough for you. So yes, Mason, she's here with me." Gasps rippled around us. Mason sputtered. "This is betrayal." "Planning to do what exactly?" Noah cut in with surgical precision. "Get back together with her after treating her like she wasn't worth your time. That's not a plan, Mason. That's delusion." Oof! Even I winced at the accuracy. Brianna and Ashley, hovering nearby with drinks in hand, paled visibly. They knew exactly what Mason had done, and they knew there was no defending it now that it was out in full daylight. Patricia appeared behind us so quickly it was almost supernatural. "Enough," she said sharply. Mason, for the first time in his adult life, actually stopped talking. "You do not get to dictate what happens now," she said. "You ended that relationship in the cruelest way imaginable. Kira owes you nothing." "But she's—" "No," Richard called from the grill, voice carrying easily. "You made your choices, son. These are your consequences." Silence. A stunned, sizzling silence broken only by the hiss of burgers on the grill. Then, like a knife slipping between ribs, came the teenage voice of pure, unfiltered honesty. Mason's younger cousin, maybe 17, crossed her arms and said loudly, "You literally posted about outgrowing her 2 weeks ago. Why do you even care?" The entire yard dissolved into awkward coughs, stifled laughs, and one muffled snort someone tried, and failed, to hide. Mason turned a deep shade of mortified red. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Now everyone thinks I'm the villain." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Mason, you are the villain." And just like that, the confrontation cracked open, releasing the tension. People returned to their conversations, though with far more glances in our direction than before. Mason retreated to the corner with his shrinking group of influencer friends, who surrounded him like decorative houseplants, pretty, but offering no actual support. Noah exhaled and turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded. Surprisingly, yes. More than okay. For the first time, I felt seen, defended. Not by someone fighting for me, but by someone standing with me. We spent the next 2 hours eating, talking with family members, answering curious but kind questions about wildlife rehabilitation and survival skills. Richard asked about trail maintenance and land management policies. Noah's uncle, a National Park Service ranger, talked with me for 15 minutes about education funding cuts. Not once did anyone ask about followers, or aesthetics, or branding opportunities. They cared about real work, real life, real people. As the afternoon waned, I glanced toward the side of the house just in time to see Mason filming himself crying in his car, angling the camera for optimal tear-catching lighting. I blinked. Is he creating content about this? I whispered. Noah followed my gaze and groaned. Oh God. Yes, he does that. Just ignore it. I wasn't going to engage, I said. I just can't believe he's... No, Noah corrected. You can believe it. I laughed softly. He wasn't wrong. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky began turning gold, my shoulders felt looser, my lungs felt fuller, my heart felt steady. As we said our goodbyes, Patricia squeezed my hand between hers. I'm glad you're here, she murmured. You and Noah, you bring out good things in each other. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Thank you, I whispered. Noah and I walked back to his Subaru in comfortable silence. No pressure, no questions, no need to define anything. When we reached the car, he paused with his hand on the door. That went better than I expected, he said. You mean we weren't chased off the property with potato salad? I teased. He huffed a laugh. You know, he said quietly, my family hasn't been this honest with Mason in years. You being here, it forced truth into the room. Is that good? I asked. He met my gaze. For us? He nodded once. Yeah, I think it is. We drove back with the windows cracked, evening air washing through the car, carrying the scent of pine and smoke and something new. Possibility. If someone had told me a year earlier that the best relationship of my life would grow out of the ashes Mason tried to leave me in, I would have laughed. But that's exactly what happened. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic kiss in the rain, no Hollywood-style montage. Just two people who started showing up for each other, consistently, quietly, and without performance. And that kind of showing up, it builds something stronger than spark. It builds roots. Over the next few months, the diner became our unofficial headquarters. Some days we talked about trivial things, Linda's terrible taste in 80s music, the fox who kept stealing my trail markers, how Noah once wrestled a sedated elk that woke up mid-transfer. Other days, deeper conversations surfaced about burnout, about legacy, about the kind of impact we wanted to leave behind. But the shift from talking about work to building something together happened on a hike, a long one. 23 miles of rugged terrain, steep elevation, and a vista so breathtaking it made you forget oxygen existed. Noah stopped midway, squinting across the valley. You know, he said, catching his breath, we could teach entire courses out here. I shrugged. I already do. Survival basics, orientation, weather prediction. No, he said, turning to me. Not just you. We. I blinked. We? He knelt to tie a bootlace that didn't actually need tying. You teach people how to survive the wild, he said. I teach injured wildlife how to survive people. That line alone could have been a movie poster. Kira and Noah, saving both sides of the forest. You ever think, he continued, about combining those things? One place where people can learn to respect the world around them while actually helping to preserve it? My breath caught. Not romantically, but in recognition. Because I had thought about it. For years. But I'd never had the resources, time, or partner to make it real. I used to dream about an education center, I admitted. A place where kids could learn conservation from the ground up. Where classes weren't taught in fluorescent lit rooms, but in forests and meadows. But it always felt too big. Not too big with two people, Noah said. Especially not two people who specialize in different halves of the same mission. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant water. A hawk circled above us, calling once. And in that sound, I felt something shift. A path unfolding, a future crystallizing. We'd need land, I said slowly. More than I have at my cabin. We'd need funding, he agreed. And permits. And enclosures for wildlife rehab. And classrooms. It would take years. Yes, he said. But so does anything worth building. I looked at him. His face was flushed from the hike, hair messy, eyes bright. Not with ambition for applause, but ambition for impact. And it hit me. He wasn't asking me to help his dream. He was asking if we could build ours. The next 8 months were a whirlwind of planning. The kind of planning you don't realize is hard until you're knee-deep in soil samples, architectural sketches, and land surveys. We scoured listings for properties that could support both wildlife rehab and outdoor education, large enough for trails, quiet enough for animal recovery, accessible enough for students. We visited 12 properties, rejected 10. One had water access, but no sunlight. One had perfect meadows, but terrible road access. One had existing structures, but was in a flood zone. Then, finally, we found it. 40 acres of mixed forest and meadow, a creek running through the eastern side, old but stable cabins and storage buildings, a natural amphitheater-shaped clearing where the land dipped gently between two rocky ridges. Standing there, looking out across the land, Noah whispered, "This is the one." And it was. We put every dollar of our savings into the down payment. He sold a truck he'd had since college. I sold my backup generator and half my stored equipment. We applied for grants, crowdfunding, partnerships, anything that didn't require us to sell our values to get off the ground. And slowly, agonizingly, it began to happen. The first year was nothing glamorous. People assume building a conservation center is serene and noble. They do not picture. And hauling lumber in sleet, digging drainage trenches at 6 a.m., chasing raccoons out of half-finished enclosures, realizing your grant application needs one more signature you forgot to get, arguing with contractors who think eco-friendly means just slightly less toxic. We worked 12-hour days sometimes. Blisters, splinters, sunburns, sore backs. There were nights I fell asleep halfway through chewing. And yet, I had never felt more alive. Because I wasn't building content or aesthetics. I was building purpose, and I wasn't building it alone. Meanwhile, in a different corner of the universe, Mason's influencer career imploded. Not overnight, but piece by piece. It started with small things. Followers questioning why his solo mountain retreat background looked suspiciously identical to older photos. Then someone leaked a video of him snapping at a waitress for ruining his shot. Brands noticed the drop in his engagement. Then they noticed the inconsistency. Then they noticed the drama. By the time he got into his fourth relationship in 8 months, each lasting barely long enough to generate a handful of Instagram posts, the comments turned brutal. Bro is speedrunning breakups. Maybe the problem isn't all these women. Dude, therapy is cheaper than a new girlfriend every 3 weeks. He pivoted, tried rebranding, tried monetizing heartbreak. Nothing stuck. Influencers live on credibility, and his had vanished. People weren't jealous of him anymore. They were embarrassed for him. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't pity him either. He built a house of optics. I built a life of substance. One collapses, the other lasts. By the time our second anniversary of the project rolled around, the Conservation Center had its first official session. A group of 12 middle school students learning survival basics, wildlife respect, and ecological literacy. They learned how to identify tracks along the creek. They learned how to build shelters using fallen branches. They learned that wildlife isn't decoration. It's a living, breathing part of an ecosystem they're responsible for. Watching their faces light up, seeing them connect dots between theory and practice, it made every blister worth it. Noah stood beside me as a red-tailed hawk we'd rehabbed soared overhead, finally free after weeks of recovery. "This," he said quietly, "is what we were meant to build." I slipped my hand into his. He pretended it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not at all. By the end of that summer, the center had partnered with 2 state parks, 3 schools, and a national conservation organization. We hired staff, expanded enclosures, built a classroom pavilion using reclaimed timber. Word spread quickly, not through Instagram, through teachers, park rangers, parents, biologists, people who cared about the real world, not the curated one. And as the work flourished, so did we. One night, after we collapsed on the porch of the staff cabin, exhausted and filthy, Noah turned toward me. "I think," he began, voice low, "I think we're not just good partners in work." I swallowed. "No?" "No," he said softly. "We're a lot more than that." He kissed me. It was simple, quiet, exactly right. No witnesses, no camera angles, just 2 people who had built something extraordinary, both outside and inside themselves. And from that moment on, we weren't Kira and Noah, the colleagues. We were Kira and Noah. The decision to get married wasn't dramatic. No proposal with flash mobs or speeches. Just a calm conversation one night while we cleaned the rehab barn after a storm. "I want this forever," he said, sweeping straw into a pile. Me too, I said. So we did it. We made it forever. And the only place that made sense for our wedding? The education center, our land, our work, our heart. We chose biodegradable decor, local food, and a ceremony under the same ridge where our hawk first took flight. Everything was perfect, until the ghost of my past walked up the driveway 3 days before the wedding. Mason, and he wasn't there to congratulate us. 3 days before the wedding, the center was alive with motion. Staff were hauling folding chairs toward the amphitheater clearing. Noah's mother, Patricia, was checking floral arrangements made from local wild plants. I was stringing biodegradable lanterns between two old spruce trees, feeling quietly proud that everything, absolutely everything, reflected who we were. Then I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. At first, I assumed it was one of our volunteers or the caterers arriving early. But when I turned toward the parking area, my breath caught. A man stepped out of a car that wasn't familiar, but he was. Mason. Except not the Mason I remembered. This version of him looked faded, deflated, out of sync with the world around him. The beard he used to meticulously shape was patchy. His once flawless hair hung lank, unwashed. His clothes, usually expensive and curated, looked like clearance rack items worn too many days in a row. Even his posture was different. Not arrogant, not performative, just tired. He walked toward me with uneven steps, like someone bracing for impact. "Kira," he called out, lifting a hand. I stepped down from the tree stump and straightened. I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. Mostly, I was annoyed that he was trespassing on the happiest week of my life. "Mason," I said evenly, "this is private property." "I know," he said quickly. "I know, and I'm sorry. I had to talk to you. It's important." "No," I replied. "What you had to do was stay away." He flinched. But he didn't leave. He took one step closer, lowering his voice. "Kira, listen. I know now that you didn't deserve how I treated you. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and I want to warn you about something." I raised an eyebrow. "Warn me?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "It's about Noah." I almost laughed aloud. Of course, when all else fails, he turns to character assassination. "What about Noah?" I asked, crossing my arms. "He's using you," Mason said, voice trembling slightly. Not with conviction, but with desperation. "He's been manipulating this whole situation from the beginning. He saw you as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" I asked, genuinely curious what fiction he'd spin. For success," Mason said. "For stability, for relevance. You have land, skills, a whole following." I held up a hand. "What following? I don't post anything." He hesitated. And in that hesitation, his entire argument fell apart. But he pushed on anyway. "Kira, the center, you built all of this because you were afraid of being irrelevant after I left. And Noah took advantage of that." I blinked. Really blinked. "Mason," I said slowly, "you truly believe everything in my orbit revolves around you, don't you?" He opened his mouth. But before he could speak, another voice cut in. "Actually," Noah said from behind me, "her orbit exists just fine without you." Mason stiffened. Noah walked up beside me, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He'd been repairing a gate hinge and probably heard the whole thing. "Mason," he said, nodding once, "you need to leave." But Mason wasn't done. His pride wouldn't let him. "I'm trying to save her," Mason insisted, gesturing wildly at both of us. "She doesn't understand that this relationship, this facility, it's all revenge. She built it just to prove she's better than me." I stared at him. And for the first time, I didn't see the polished influencer who tried to shrink my life to fit his own. I saw a man drowning in the ruins of his own ego. "Mason," I said carefully, "we started building this center before you even posted that breakup announcement, before your followers turned on you, before your sponsored deals dropped." He went pale. "And let me make something very clear," I added. "My life stopped revolving around you the second you tried to downgrade me. Everything I built after that was for me, not you." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "But you're marrying him," Mason said, voice cracking now. "You're actually going to marry my brother? You don't see how messed up that is?" Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Sharp, stern, and done with the drama. "Mason Arthur Blake," Patricia said, marching toward us with the force of a woman who had raised 2 sons and tolerated enough. "Stop embarrassing yourself." Mason's eyes widened. "Mom!" "No," she snapped. "I have listened to your excuses for years. But this?" She swept her hand toward Noah and me. "This is not your business anymore." "Mom, Noah is building the life he wants. And Kira? She is not yours. She never was." The world went silent. Only the sound of wind brushing through the trees moved in the background. Richard approached next, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "Mason," he said, voice quiet but dangerous, "you haven't taken responsibility for a single one of your choices. You hurt Kira. You lied about it online. And now you want to rewrite the narrative so you can feel like the victim?" He shook his head. "That's enough." Mason stood frozen like a cornered animal. He looked at me with a sudden, wild desperation. "Kira, please," he whispered. "Tell me you still care. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me." And then, like fate itself had excellent comedic timing, Noah's teenage cousin, same girl who roasted Mason at the barbecue, appeared at the edge of the clearing, holding a stack of biodegradable plates. She took in the scene, sighed, and said loudly, "Dude, if she's so irrelevant to you, why are you here trying to ruin her wedding?" Silence. A stunned, glorious silence. Mason's face folded, his pride cracked like thin ice. And finally, he broke. Not into anger, but into something raw and small. "Fine," he muttered. "Fine. Have your little wedding. Have your little center. See if I care." He stormed back toward his car, tripping on a tree root, cursing under his breath, swiping at his eyes in a way he tried very hard to make look like irritation and not tears. But we all saw. We all knew. Noah pulled out his radio and called security. "Escort him off the property," he said simply. "He's trespassing." Which they did, swiftly and professionally. Mason didn't fight. He just drove off, tires spitting dust, disappearing down the road like a ghost, finally being swept out of the story. When the car vanished around the bend, the entire group exhaled in unison. "Well," Noah said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders, "at least there are no more ghosts haunting our celebration." I leaned into him. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed it. There were no ghosts left, only us, and the life we were about to begin. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of morning that felt like a blessing. Sunlight streamed through the trees in warm golden bands. The air was crisp but gentle. Birds chattered, as if gossiping about the show to come. Even the creek behind the amphitheater seemed to run a little more musically, as though the whole forest had agreed. Yes, today is a good day. The clearing we'd chosen for the ceremony was the same natural amphitheater Noah and I had discovered on day one of the property tour. Back then, it had been nothing special, just a dip in the land, partially overgrown, quiet and hidden. Now, it was alive. Wooden benches built by us, sanded and stained during late-night work sessions, circled the altar area. Simple garlands of wild greenery draped over the benches. Lanterns hung from tree limbs, catching the morning light on their biodegradable paper shades. Our staff moved with focused joy, adjusting seating, placing water carafes, making sure the rescued owls in the nearby enclosure were calm and fed before guests arrived. Everything was exactly how we wanted it. Not extravagant, not curated, not performative. Just honest, intentional, ours. Patricia helped me pin the last strand of my hair, stepping back to admire her work with the quiet pride of a woman who'd always wanted a daughter and finally got one. "You look like yourself," she said, soft and warm. "That's what matters." She didn't say beautiful, though she could have. But yourself meant more. As she left to get dressed, I slipped into the gown hanging by the window. Soft linen, embroidered with subtle wildflower patterns hand-stitched by Noah's grandmother. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. Just me. When I stepped outside, the forest breeze caught the hem, lifting it slightly, as though nature itself was giving an approving nod. Guests began to arrive. Staff, students' parents, wildlife rehab partners, park rangers, teachers, hikers, local conservationists. Every person there represented a piece of our journey. No designer shoes, no choreographed content moments, no influencer friends posing for reels. Just real people who believed in what we were building. And then Noah stepped into view. He wore a simple charcoal vest and rolled-up sleeves, his dark hair tied loosely at the back. His eyes softened when he saw me, utterly unguarded, all warmth. Suddenly, the world narrowed. Not small, not stifling, just focused. Like everything had been leading, slowly, painfully, beautifully, to this exact moment. He reached for me as I walked down the aisle, and when our hands met, it felt like grounding and flight all at once. Richard officiated the ceremony in his steady, gravelly voice. He wasn't overly sentimental, but every word he spoke carried the weight of a man who'd seen his son stumble, break, rebuild, and finally choose better. "Noah," Richard said, "you've always had a good heart. Today, you choose someone whose heart matches yours." He turned to me, And Kira, you've shown strength, grit, and compassion in ways that change this family. Today, you're not joining us. You're leading with us. Noah squeezed my hand. I didn't cry. Noah did. Quietly. Perfectly. We exchanged vows we wrote ourselves. Simple promises about partnership, responsibility, the work we do, and the future we wanted to build both on the land and with each other. When they said husband and wife, the forest seemed to exhale. And the applause that echoed through the trees wasn't loud or chaotic. It was warm, steady, true. The reception was held under a canopy of string lights we'd installed earlier in the week. Tables were arranged with local food, roasted vegetables, fresh fruit, handmade bread, wildflower honey, and dishes our staff contributed. People laughed easily. Kids ran between trees. The owls hooted from their enclosure in what sounded like approval. At one point, I saw Noah dancing, badly, with two young students from my previous survival course, both giggling as they tried to teach him a TikTok move he was clearly incapable of learning. It was perfect. Later, as the crowd thinned and the last lanterns burned low, Noah and I walked down to the creek. Fireflies hovered like floating sparks. The water glowed silver under the moonlight. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, chin brushing my shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" he murmured. "All the time," I said. "And does it feel real?" I leaned back into him. "More real than anything I've ever known." We stood there in silence as the creek murmured over stone and root. Somewhere in the distance, a fox yipped, a wild, bright sound that struck me as oddly symbolic. New beginnings often sound like that, unexpected, untamed, alive. 3 years passed in what felt like 2 blinks and one long, beautiful inhale. Our conservation center expanded to 60 acres after a partner organization donated adjoining land. We built new enclosures, added a second classroom building, and hired 8 more staff members. We rehabilitated more than 400 animals in our 3rd year alone. We trained educators who went on to start similar programs in other states. We were featured in a regional documentary about innovative conservation models. And one evening, after a day spent teaching emergency shelter building to a group of high school students, Noah found me on the main deck with a cup of tea. "You know," he said, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For walking out of that restaurant." I laughed. "You don't have to thank me for that." "No," he said gently, "but I do. Because the moment you chose yourself, everything else became possible." He kissed me softly. And I realized then that love, real love, isn't built on grand gestures or perfect timing. It's built on partners who see your worth even when someone else tried to convince you you didn't have any. Partners who choose you not for aesthetics, wealth, status, or optics, but for who you are in the quiet moments. Who you are when no one is watching. Who you are when the world goes dark and you're left with only instinct, grit, and heart. And if you're lucky enough to find someone who sees all that in you, you hold on. Not because you need them to complete you, but because you can build something extraordinary together, greater than either of you could have built alone. As I stand here now, 3 years after that messy, humiliating anniversary dinner that once felt like the end of my world, I realize it was the beginning of my real one. Because sometimes being broken isn't failure. Sometimes it's opening. Sometimes it's clearing a path for the life that's been waiting for you all along. And to anyone listening to this who has ever been treated like they were small or insignificant or not enough, remember this. You are not a downgrade. You are not a placeholder. You are not a backup plan. You are someone's beginning, someone's peace, someone's partner in a purpose bigger than ego. And the moment you choose yourself, everything changes. Guys, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this story. We are so close to hitting 100,000 subscribers, and your support helps more than you know. If you enjoyed this emotional journey through heartbreak, healing, and building something beautiful, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories. This channel exists because of you. Here's to growth, here's to purpose, and here's to choosing yourself first.